Hey everybody, time for a new perspective with Mike Sherbino and Julie Stautland. Today, what do we do about the rotten people in church? Some say the church is a hospital where broken, imperfect people gather to worship, share love, honesty, the truth, and above all, heal. Others say it's the perfect place for the enemy to hide and so have turned far away from it because of what they have either read about it or have experienced. Today, Mike and Julie are joined by Dr. David Sherbino, author of the most recent book, Essentials, and Pastor Joel Sherbino. A fascinating show as we don't bury our heads and hearts in the sand, but discuss the important issue of clergy abuse. Vital perspective shared by followers of Jesus, Mike, Julie, David, and Joel.
Hey, we're glad you're with us today on The Perspective. We are talking about a very heavy subject today, but a subject that I know is on people's minds. Sometimes in the back of their mind, they're mocking the church, thinking they're the ones that say they have it all together, and look at how they're messing up. And other times, people are dealing with the backlash of feeling my trust has been violated, plus a whole other plethora of emotions and feelings. So, Julie, we want to talk about clergy abuse. And I'm almost hesitant to do it, but it's a big subject.
It is a big subject, so...
And I'd rather talk about it, even if we blunder a bit. You know, every day I receive a news feed. It's a ministry news feed. And as I read it, it's for North America. And basically it highlights the good and the bad. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bad things that are coming out. And a lot of times it's with clergy abuse or taking advantage of someone because of the power of that situation. So today, we're going to do a couple of shows on this over the next little while. But today, my brother David, professor at Tyndale and pastor for many years, and his son Joel, who's also a pastor, they're going to join us today. So let's welcome these guys to the table. And we're glad you're with us. And Joel, why don't you just take 15 seconds and tell us a little bit about what you do in that whole realm of what's called ministry.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. I'm involved in kind of two primary things. One is I pastor a church here in Paris, Ontario, and then a quarter of my time I work with our international partners in Malawi, primarily with the prison ministry. So I help oversee a ministry that engages 22 prisons in the southern part of Malawi.
Yeah, and that's a mind-boggling subject in itself. But we're going to leave that for right now. David, tell us what are some of the highlights in your career? What are you doing right now?
Well, I've just returned from Malawi with Joel, where we work in these prisons. And then I'm working right now with a group of doctoral students in the area of formation. And then also in the area of that I work in thanatology, which is in bereavement, grief, death, and dying.
Okay. Well, as we think about that and try to wrap our head around all those things, you're working with a lot of people that are preparing, David, to go into ministry. And Joel, you're doing it, 24/7 as well, in ministry day by day. David, let's talk about the whole thing of spiritual egos. Let's start there. Is there anything connected to that and this whole subject of clergy abuse?
Well, I think what happens is that not one single person that I know of has ever entered into ministry with the thought, I'm going to take advantage of people. I think they've always entered in with the idea, I'm here to help. I want to share the good news of the gospel. I want to be Christ's representative. But what happens is sometimes is that our ego takes over, and it often becomes a slow, very subtle drift. And I think what happens is that sometimes we get caught up with the position of power, and we don't realize how subtle and how insidious that can be. But people respect us to some extent, and many times you will see clergy using their position as I am the pastor or I am this leader of this church, and therefore they think they have garnered respect and they can do whatever they want. I don't think they think that in their mind, but I think it's a subtle thing. Like that's why I never like titles. I don't want to be called the Reverend, Doctor. I don't want to be called Pastor. I want to be known on a first name basis because I don't want to set myself up as in a way that says I have more authority than you, even though I know the position brings with it responsibility.
Well, Joel, would you agree with that, what David is saying?
Yeah, I think the idea of a slow drift, and I think, one of the practical things that I really try to develop in my own life as a pastor, as a husband, as a father, is creating appropriate boundaries, and just realizing that it takes one moment to suddenly step into a place where you can't recover from, and so sometimes it feels awkward. You create boundaries, and I remember this early on in my ministry when I was working with youth. And we talked about the importance of setting up boundaries. And so something that I've always wanted to do is just set boundaries and not put myself in a position where I'm going to have to make a very difficult call. And so I agree 100%. Like I didn't come into the ministry thinking, yeah, this is going to happen. But I think we're naive to think it could not happen to me. We always think it can happen to someone else, but we don't take it seriously enough until we say, this could be a reality for me in my life. So what am I intentionally doing to not put myself in that position?
And on the other foot, why do you think some women seem to be put in such difficult situations? Joel, let's start with you.
Well, I think oftentimes it comes from a place of people who are hurting, people who are wanting healing, are coming to someone who they believe is safe, who believes that they have the best interest in them. And then, unfortunately, what can happen is this unhealthy relationship can begin to happen. And the person who has come to experience healing actually experiences even greater hurt. And I think that is the beginning place of there's an incredible sense of vulnerability. Women are pouring their hearts out. And these pastors are unfortunately getting engaged in this in a way that's completely inappropriate. And then it just goes too far.
David, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think that there are several other dimensions that can take place. For example, if you have someone coming in who's really struggling, very often they might not have any sense of self-worth. Their esteem could be very low. And here is a person who is going to give them focused attention for maybe 60 minutes. They listen to them, they're very compassionate, they're understanding. And they can be what we call in psychology an idea of transference. I begin to idealize who that other person is. And I build them up in such a way that in my mind, they are the perfect person. And my feelings could even be moving towards that person. The other party, which let's say is the pastor, if he doesn't or she doesn't understand the dynamics of transference, they can get caught up with that and think, look how wonderful I am.
Yeah.
And they begin to buy into that as well. And pretty soon you have some feelings of mutual attraction that are starting to happen between the two individuals. And so I think Joel is absolutely right. You've got to be aware that this can happen. I think it can happen to any one of us. But when I'm aware of these feelings and I'm aware of the position that I am in, I have to make some hard decisions as to what I'm going to do. And so by establishing significant boundaries, I am putting a layer of protection into that relationship.
I think that's great wisdom that you share, that it can happen to anybody, no matter how strong you think your faith is, no matter how well you've lived up to that point, that every single one of us can find ourselves in a vulnerable situation. And what do we do to protect that?
One of the things that I struggle with is like where we all live within about an hour and a half of each other in Southern Ontario. We know there's some large names, and they have succumbed to, moral indiscretion, which is, I don't even like that title. But anyways, that's a subject for another day. The problem is that we find out that it's been not just a one-time event, which is bad enough. I'm not saying that's even good, but it's been repetitive for years and years and years. Why do people who preach the gospel live a different thing, live a different life? Talk to us about the entrapment that goes on. Joel, do you got a thought?
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to guard against is when we try to just segment our life and we think, well, I'm doing ministry, and we try to excuse it. And we get into a place where, yeah, I mean, in my conversation with some of my friends, with even my kids who are teenagers, like they're aware of what's going on. And they ask me the question, like, how can someone stand up and face a congregation and people and talk in such a way when they know, in their own life, they are completely messing up. Now, I realize that we all mess up, but in moments like this, like I just think you begin to allow to believe a lie that it's not that big of a deal, or that perhaps you're going to get out of it. And so by admitting to anything, that would just ruin everything. And it's just a major issue. Like we talk about confession, but all we ever see within the church is people only confess once they're caught. Yeah. That's not legitimate confession. Confession is coming forward and saying, no one else knows about this. I'm going to lay this on the table. And so I think it comes back to that ego. It comes back to this thing of, I can get out of this. It's not that big of a deal. And then they only admit it when it completely blows up in front of them.
We're going to come back and talk more after a very short break. Sometimes just to unwind and keep it all together, I get in my truck and go for a drive. Sometimes I get on my motorcycle. We do all sorts of different things to try to keep ourselves together. We want to help you in your journey of life, to keep it together, to discover God's principles for living. All this month, I want to make available to you free of charge Dr. Grant Mullen's amazing book, Emotionally Free. It's a prescription for healing, body, soul, and spirit. I love this book. I recommend it to people. I want to give it to you. Write to us at theperspective.tv.
Okay, I want to jump right back in here and ask you, David, what does Jesus say about leaders who abuse their positions?
Well, I think the Lord has a lot of things to say about those in leadership. If you look at the New Testament epistles, it says that those who teach and have leadership responsibilities in the church face greater scrutiny by God. So when you think about it, when I was first ordained, and I'm sure for every ordained minister, you are in a position whereby the church has recognized gifts and abilities, and they have set you apart to provide leadership for the church. And we are to shepherd the flock of God, which implies caring for the people of God. And I remember my own ordination vows, which I took over about 40 years ago, that I made this statement that I would conduct my private and public life in a manner that represents the gospel of Jesus. And I think about that ordination vow over and over again. And so I have a responsibility before God to live out that commitment and that vow that I took. And when you take a vow before God, that is really, really serious. I think sometimes we have not understood the seriousness of promises that we do make. And the people in our congregational settings believe that we will act in a manner that represents the gospel of Jesus. And so when I violate that, it's going to cause all kind of confusion in their mind. It's going to cause hurt in their heart, and it's going to cause damage to all kinds of people when I violate those principles that I have undertaken. And so I think that I need to understand very carefully the commitment that I'm actually making. And to go back to what was said a little bit earlier, I don't think anyone ever starts out in ministry thinking, I'm going to violate this. But I think there's that drift. And here's my question. Am I maintaining in my leadership role a strong personal relationship with Jesus? Or am I just studying the Bible in order to teach another Bible study, to prepare a sermon, to conduct a funeral, to do a wedding, whatever? So I can officiate in a religious manner, but am I nurturing and developing my own inner life? And so John Wesley, the leader of the Methodist Church, or the founder, asked this question of his people regularly: how is it with your soul? And if no one is asking ministers and leaders of the church that question, it's easy for them to forget about their own relationship with Jesus.
Okay, so let me jump in right at this point.
It's a really good point.
You've made some very good points. Let's jump ahead to the pastor who has been involved in an affair. Is it possible for him ever to go back into that situation, should he? Joel, what's your thoughts on it?
Wow. Yeah. Again, it touches so close. I mean, I I really don't think there is. I know we talk about the importance of restoration and the importance of forgiveness, but I think when you have abused your power in that position, I don't think you can. I don't think you can step into that place. I mean, if we're going to talk specifically about it, we talk about the meeting house and we talk about how they pulled all of Bruxy Cavy's teaching. And I think that was a wise decision by the meeting house because they don't want it to trigger. They don't want things to be, regardless of what the good teaching is, regardless of if I were to mess up, there's no way I could step back into a congregation here in Paris or maybe even anywhere. Like, I do think there's a greater responsibility, as David said, that those in leadership will be judged accordingly. And I just think that if you violate that, to step back in, because I think you're going to be scrutinized and people are always going to wonder, like, well, what about this time? What about next time? And so simple answer, no, I don't think you can step back into the place. If you have violated it, if you have abused your power, I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think how you're summarizing it isn't an issue of whether or not a person can be forgiven. It's a matter of consequence. Like, you may have to go and do something else in life because of the responsibility of that position in taking care of a flock, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so then in a situation where you walk into, and I've walked in as a pastor where there has been infidelity with the leadership prior to me coming, give us some thoughts very briefly, because our time will run out, on how to rebuild trust. Like, you've heard it, David, you've heard it. We'll start with you. I don't want to go to church. They're all a bunch of hypocrites. How are you addressing that?
Well, the first thing I think we need to understand is that when people have been victimized, we have to walk with them in their journey. And this is going to be a long, slow process. And so to build trust is not easy, because they're always going to wonder, is this going to happen again? So I think they need to be around people who will understand what's going on in their life, and maybe get them started again in a small group where they feel very comfortable. This is not going to be easy. That's why I think that when people have violated trust, they often have to be removed from the situation. And to be quite frankly, if there's been adultery in a marriage, for example, that's the violation of trust. And I have seen very few marriages survive that kind of a scenario. They've been forgiven, but they're not able to build back that marriage relationship. I'm not saying it's never happened, but I'm saying it's extremely, extremely difficult. And so I think we need to walk through the pain of those who have been violated, whose trust has been broken, and we need to see how that healing process can occur. And it's going to take a unique scenario for every individual, because we're all so different.
So what do you say to people who believe church is not a building, but in ancient times were held in homes?
Well, I think what we're going to be seeing today more and more is that there's going to be the rise of what I think is called the microchurch. Many people are wanting to meet back in places, but I think the other thing is the larger body is able to do more things in different ways. So a small house church can do certain things, and a larger community of faith can do other things. And so I think we need probably both. When you look at the book of Acts, they met daily in the temple courts, so that's the public worship, but they also met in their homes. And so I think there is the back and forth of both.
Hey, Joel, let me jump to you for a moment. As a guy who pastors a church, do you bring these subjects up in front of the congregation? How do you address them? Or do you do it privately?
No, I think publicly you have to own it. I'd say one thing the church has to do is just own it, because the problem is it's not just the initial abuse, it's then the cover-up. And we've seen this, and we see it with the Catholic Church. We see it within large mega churches. We see it with the Southern Baptist Church in the US, the largest Protestant denomination. And I think you almost perpetuate the abuse. And you think you come to a place, and I think you own it. You confess it. You say there's no excuse. There's no reason that this is acceptable. And that's the place that you land. And so when people come to me, and specifically make these accusations about things that have happened in other churches or other pastors, I don't try to deny it. I say, yeah, we are a broken world and we are broken people. And that's why we need Jesus in the midst of our lives. And so number one thing I do is I just own it, and I don't try to dismiss it or rationalize it or excuse it. Just say this is the unfortunate reality. And then how do we then move forward?
Wow, this is such a heavy topic, and I really appreciate you guys coming on and sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
All right, stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back with Mike and the Word.
I thank you, Lord, for my wonderful, beautiful, amazing wife, Monica.
And that the things of the past would fade away. And all my messiness, she's just continued to love.
We've been asking you for this, and we're ready to see it, God.
I'm just so blessed by the woman that you have made Jordan to be.
I was surprised at how natural it felt, though, to look into someone's eyes and to pray for them.
You really start to see and you start to feel the presence of God.
Amen. Good job.
Mike, you're a pastor. How did it hit you with what your brother and your nephew said about all of this stuff?
I think a couple of days ago we were joking on the show how we all went camping together. And of course, when you're brothers and you're together, there's a different way you communicate to each other. Some very candid conversations. But as they were talking, I was more listening and having flashbacks.
Okay.
And the flashbacks were, as I was thinking, I'm grateful that God protected me. But David talked about people coming to see you and they're very vulnerable. And when I was a young pastor, I didn't understand the depths of their vulnerability. And thankfully, I have a great wife and a great marriage. But, you know, I needed to set harder boundaries. I always had boundaries in place where, you know, there was people around, so you weren't in this close, confined area. But the temptation, it's so subtle.
Right.
And you have to be careful, because even what starts to go into your mind and you're playing little games with yourself, even though you'd never want to admit you're an egomaniac. You know, and there's the whole thing, the spiritual ego. Oh, people need me. They want me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if there's something that seminary and Bible colleges need to do in the preparation is something around the whole area of knowing yourself.
I think that's a really wonderful point, because of the fact that if we think, like Joel said, that we are above reproach and that, you know, I'm better than other people. And no, we are all vulnerable, no matter how close we try to be to Jesus, how much we press into our faith. We are human. We have the original sin nature that we talk about and how it affects us. And we need to set up those proper safeguards, no matter how well we're doing. And let's face it, we want to continue to do well. So if we are doing well, then we're doing something right. Let's keep doing it.
Yeah, and we all get disappointed.
We all
do. 5-6 weeks ago, I was in the room with a number of clergy being led by a distinguished clergy, only to find out 2 weeks ago that he was leading a double life. I just found that devastating.
It is.
And I think it's good, like Joel said, I'm just going to own it today and say we grieve.
Yes.
I want to take careful guard over my own heart. I want to encourage pastors who are watching today to really pull up their, as they say, their bootstraps and say, what protection do I put in place? And I think some of the teaching today is going to help us as we regain our focus.
Absolutely. And next week as well, we're going to have Melody Bissell from Plan to Protect from a woman's perspective, dealing with this very, very important issue as well. So it's going to be good.
Good.
All right. Stay with us, everyone. Michael will be back with the word.
You know, one of the words that's been flipping around in the back of my mind as we have done the program today is the little word fear. And for some of you, you're fearful of trusting again. I get that. You're fearful, you want to trust people in the church, but you're saying, I'm not sure I should go there. And as a result, you can just rule out something that God has actually prepared for you and I. You say, why would I put myself at risk? Well, every day we put ourselves at risk in relationships, places we work, we go to school. We don't know what the future is going to hold. And I've heard the line before, and possibly you have, let's not put our trust in man. We need to put it in Jesus. I'm going to be honest that many times the first Jesus people will ever meet will be me or possibly you, because we're his representatives. And it's a high calling. But what does fear do in our life? I mean, even as a pastor, it's easy for me to be gripped by fear and want to shrink back and say, you know what, I'm just going to get out of this ministry while things are good. And I don't want anyone to point a finger of accusation at me. And we know that it can happen all over. And even if you are innocent, you can still get smeared in something. And so we live with fear. We live with fear in so many aspects of our life. One day, Jesus was with his disciples and they were on a boat. We're going to talk more about it tomorrow, but it's in Mark 4. And as they're on the boat, he falls asleep. You know the story, and a great windstorm breaks up. And it just comes upon the boat, and the disciples are afraid they're going to drown. And they said, don't you care? And he wakes up, he rebukes the sea, and everything is peaceful. As I think about fear and various kinds of fears, sometimes fear is wanting to intimidate me, saying that this situation is more than I can handle. Or sometimes it can immobilize you. It just cause you to freeze in your tracks and not move forward, even in your spiritual journey, because what has happened to you. And sometimes fear will just infuriate you and cause you to hate everyone and anyone. But I want you to be open to the presence of Jesus to bring his healing and his hope to you in your situation today, because we can trust again.
Hi, I'm Dr. Grant Mullen, and welcome to Keys to Healing. In each segment, I'll answer one of your questions, and then I'll give you another key to help you along in your journey to healing physically, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. Now, today's question is, how much faith do you need to pray for healing? I know some of you are thinking only TV evangelists or pastors or professional Christians have enough faith to pray for healing. Why would God listen to you? Well, when I was growing up, I really didn't have a lot of faith for healing. I was a little bit cynical until a minister came to our church and offered to teach us how to pray for sicknesses. So I volunteered because I'd like to learn. He had me pray for a person who had a crooked spine and one leg shorter than the other as a result. So I prayed for her just the way he instructed. And while I was watching her spine straighten and her leg grew out, I was shocked. And I learned an important lesson. You only need mustard seed faith to release a miracle. My faith was that small, and a miracle still happened. So never miss an opportunity to pray for someone, even if your faith is small, because you never know when a miracle can happen.